Hello and welcome to this segment of Introduction to Autonomous Systems. If you recall, in the last session we had looked at the 5 attributes in a pentagonal representation of autonomy, and we had also talked about various levels of autonomy that one can achieve till you get systems with full autonomy. In this particular session, we are going to look at an important aspect of autonomous operation in the context of the kind of automations that we have already seen and are seeing all around us. Sometimes there is always a bit of a confusion between what is autonomous and what is automated. So, we need to understand this difference, and this lecture essentially will try to bring out the comparison between these two attributes and also establish clearly where we feel that it is an automation and where we know it is an autonomous operation. So, let us begin today's session. If you actually look at this word automation in isolation, we bring in an idea that whenever there is no human intervention, we might feel it is an autonomous system, which means if we avoid human input, we kind of get an impression that this is automatic. In fact, you will realize that ever since the machines have been invented, we have found ways to make their operation independent of human intervention in order to ease the load and increase the output. You look at shop floor, assembly lines, manufacturing factories, packaging industry, transportation, material handling, there is a huge amount of mechanization or automation which has already entered into these areas. Household appliances also fall under this category where their functions are being automated. For example, washing machines, they will, once you start, they work in a kind of an automatic manner till the wash is complete. So, there is really no human intervention or a support needed once the operation has started. So, the question which arises in our mind is that, do such systems have autonomy? Particularly because we see no human intervention during their operation. So, can we say that these are all autonomous systems? Even though we might be tempted to make that statement, it would be important and useful for us to take a pause and take a step back and start looking at this automated operation in the context of autonomy attributes and see whether the attributes of autonomy that we have discussed are being reflected in their operation. And to do that, I thought it is best to take an example and bring out these important features that we are now looking at. So, let me pose a question. Is a thermostat, which is very elementary device which is employed for regulating temperatures of a fridge or a room or an oven, is autonomous. So, can we say that operation carried out by a thermostat is autonomous? We seem to get an impression that the temperature in the fridge gets controlled without our intervention, or even in the room where places are centrally air conditioned. So, considering that, can we say that thermostat is an autonomous system? In order to answer this question, we use autonomy attributes as the benchmarks, because that is how we have started the whole discussion. We have been saying that autonomous systems will require those 5 attributes plus the 6th one, that is the knowledge base. So, let us use those benchmarks and see whether we can classify its functioning. So, let us first start with the perception. So, there is no issue there. We note that thermostat receives percepts in the form of the current temperature. So, basically there is a temperature sensor which provides the temperature in whatever form, and based on a set value either supplies or extracts the heat, which means the thermostat now receives what is the current temperature, and whatever the temperature value that has been set, it either increases the heat input or extracts the heat input. This is the basic operation of a thermostat as a temperature regulator. Now, if you look at the first point, the operation depends on a set value, and please note, thermostat has no way of setting this value. That value has been set by a human in factory and can only be changed by another human when you want a different temperature inside. So, please note, there is implicitly a human intervention built into this process. Further, we will note that there is no reflection really, because there is no calculation of the environment. The environment is given, that the volume of the fridge is fixed or the volume of the room is fixed, which means that environment is known and fixed. So, obviously no goal management and planning is required, because it is already set. They are given in the form of predefined actions, because there will be a heater or there will be a cooler which is already provided, which will run at a specific speed or a temperature and will happen definitely. So, everything has been predefined. Lastly, there is no possibility of self adaptation, because in case you want to change the configuration, a human intervention is essential, and consequently modification to this action also will require human intervention. Even though we have not really considered the knowledge as an attribute per se, it is a prerequisite. You will also note that the thermostat per se has no knowledge base. So, obviously, if we put all these together, we get an impression that thermostat is not really an autonomous system in the true sense of the word. It is only an automated activity or automated devices, which based on the predefined actions and set values, it takes action. So, now let us go back to another example of washing machine, and now you will realize that even though it is appearing to have no human intervention, please note the cycles that it goes through have a fixed time period, a fixed sequence in which each of those activities will be conducted. If you want to change the sequence, there is a pause button that you need to press, and human intervention changes the sequence. The machine by itself will not be able to change. If you look at the buttons themselves have a predefined action coded into it by a human. So, now you realize that all these devices which give us an impression that there is no human intervention, they are not really autonomous in the true sense of the word. They are only automated actions, the actions which have been automated during the design upfront by human intervention, and they continue to operate in that mode until the configuration is modified. And thus we come to the conclusion that thermostat is just like a simple input output device. There are set inputs and there are set outputs. This is typically what is also seen by a lot of people in open loop control. It is a kind of an open loop system and everything has been preset. And we can say that all systems that operate in an automated mode do not possess any autonomy over their actions. Now, please note, this is the key part, that if they have autonomy over their actions, then only we can start thinking of these devices as autonomous devices. Of course, in all automated devices, humans have a critical role, which will either to set actions or modify the actions or goals or objectives. And now that we have understood the difference between automation and autonomy, let us bring in the human roles. So, if we want to create systems, all automated systems to become autonomous, then it is intuitive for us to expect that all such devices will need to behave like humans. The way we behave, the way we kind of take actions, all the automated systems, if they have to have autonomy, they must now have attributes of humans. And that is where we find that the system will become slowly autonomous, so that they can behave like we behave, because we are autonomous systems in the true sense of the word. And that brings into focus many critical aspects of human action that now we need to worry about. For example, data processing is an important action that we take. Situational awareness, reasoned decision making, which means we have the capability of reasoning out a particular decision, taking action, and we have the ability to learn. And now you will realize that in order for a system to become autonomous, it will have to have the ability to process the data, generate the situational awareness, have the capability to reason out a particular decision and take action consistent with the decision, and also keep learning all the time, so that the knowledge base gets upgraded and updated. And all these skills involve studying how humans do this. We cannot overemphasize this critical aspect, that any system that we want to make autonomous, we will have to include human centric skills in such systems. And even though we may not have stated it, we may not have realized it ourselves, everything that we have looked at is driven by a human function which is extremely critical, called thought. It is that thought which makes us different from everything else. And in fact, I am sure many of you would have heard of this quote, which is very famous, that I think, therefore I am. In fact, human existence is directly related to ability to think. And if we want systems which are autonomous, they have to behave like humans, then immediately you start feeling that unless the system that you create has a skill of thought, it will never be autonomous. And our whole effort in this first segment of this course itself would be to look at this process of thought and ways and mechanisms of bringing it into the context of machines that we are creating that will generate autonomous systems. And if we go down one more level lower, we now find that thought is primarily a mental activity of humans, and that in a very, very loose sense is attributed to what is commonly called intelligence. And that brings in an important aspect of creating autonomous systems, that they need to become now intelligent, because when they become intelligent, they will be capable of thought, and if they are capable of thought, then they will have all those ideas that we discussed, like reasoned decision making, taking actions, learning. All of that now will be driven by what is called an intelligence that you need to provide in machines. In fact, sometimes autonomous systems also are treated like intelligent machines, machines that are intelligent, which means they have the capability of human centric skill of thought. And that brings us to the important first step in the context of AI or artificial intelligence. So, just to put the problem in perspective, we need to make this statement that in order to make intelligent machines, we must understand what intelligence is. That is extremely important. In fact, that is something which is really going to trouble us a lot. We will try and make an effort to understand this to the extent possible, but there is a possibility that we may still not be able to capture the various ramifications of what intelligence is all about. And the next important step, even after you understand how does one put it in the machine, you will find that these two are going to be the primary driver of any activity that wants to create a system which is autonomous or a machine which is intelligent. So, this is going to be the focus of our subsequent material for some time, until we get a reasonable idea of what we are about and how we can go about doing our business. And the very first step that we are going to have to take is to understand the intelligence as a human trait to the extent that it can be implemented in a machine through what we call a process of engineering, which means can we engineer intelligence, something which is at this point appears a little bit esoteric or kind of a philosophical statement, that can we engineer intelligence. Even though it does not seem at this point a very easy task, we will have to get down to it, and that will automatically lead us to this whole game of artificial intelligence. So, to conclude this segment, we have realized that automation does not bring autonomy, and to make any system autonomous, we must make it human like through the concepts of thought and intelligence. So, with that we come to the end of this segment, and in the next segment we will start our discussion on this whole idea of intelligence, what it means, what is the implication of thoughts, and how we can then look at it from the point of view of incorporating in machines to make autonomous systems. So, with that we close this lecture. Bye for now. Thank you and hope to see you in the next lecture.